Hello everyone, this is Jag. In this video, I'm going to cover vegetables and herbs that grow really well in shade. And I'm going to section this video in 3 different parts. The first part is going to be the vegetables and herbs that do really well in shade. The second section is going to be vegetables and herbs that will grow in shade, will give you some harvest, but it won't be as big of a harvest as if they were grown in full sun. The third section is going to be focused on vegetables and herbs that you should never plant in shade that really require full sun. So let's get started. Number 1, basil. Now basil does really well in shade. If planted in full sun, the basil leaves get little hard, they get a little prickly, and they get very small. When planted in shade, basil produces really broad and soft leaves. So it's really good to plant basil in shade and then have some basil leaves for making some pesto. Number 2, mint. Now mint is similar to basil as well. Mint will grow really well in shade and produce really big and broad leaves in shade. If planted in full sun, the leaves of mint actually gets really prickly and very hard, and they don't even really taste good. So I always grow mint and basil in shade. Number 3, cilantro or parsley. Cilantro and parsley will do well in full sun, however they also grow really well in shade as well. Parsley especially does really well in shade. You can always use parsley instead of using cilantro if your cilantro is bolting. When the temperature gets above 80° Fahrenheit, cilantro tends to bolt right away. So it's really hard to grow cilantro in summer. Cilantro is really good to grow in spring and fall. However, all summer long you can grow parsley in shade. Number 4, lettuce. Now lettuce is a spring or fall crop. Lettuce also likes really cool weather. However, you can grow lettuce in shade in summer if your temperature doesn't get too hot. By too hot, I mean doesn't get over 100° Fahrenheit or 39 to 40 degrees Celsius, doesn't get above 40 degrees Celsius. So you can grow lettuce in shade. If the weather does get hot or your lettuce is planted in full sun, the lettuce will bolt. Let me show you the lettuce that's planted in full sun and is bolting.
So here I have some romaine lettuce, and it's planted in full sun and it's bolting right away. I usually grow lettuce in shade, however the weather was a little bit cooler, so I thought I can use this area to plant lettuce, but I was wrong. As soon as it got a little bit hot, the lettuce started to bolt.
Number 5, spinach. Now spinach is also a fall or spring crop. However, you can grow spinach in summer in shade as well. Now spinach takes a longer time to germinate. It might take up to 2 weeks to germinate. So a quick tip, you can soak spinach seeds in water overnight and then plant the spinach seeds, and they tend to germinate much quicker. You can grow spinach indoors first and then transplant. However, if you do the soaking method, you can plant spinach seeds directly in your garden after they are soaked. Number 6, kale. Kale also likes cooler weather. In summer, kale leaves get really bitter and very tough, and they're inedible. However, if you plant kale in shade, you can still harvest the leaves of kale in summer and eat them as well. However, in spring and fall, kale should be planted in full sun. Since kale is a perennial, here's what I do. I plant kale under the shade of fruit trees or trees that lose their leaves in fall. That way, the trees provide shade to kale plants during summer, and then they lose their leaves and the kale plants get full sun in spring and winter. Number 7, Swiss chard. Now Swiss chard also prefers cooler weather. However, Swiss chard does really well in shade.
So I have these 2 really big and beautiful mulberry trees. These are fruitless mulberries. I wish they were fruitful. However, these trees produce a lot of shade. So I made a shade garden around here. So the first half of the garden gets 100% shade. The second half gets 50% shade. It gets about 4 to 5 hours of sunlight during the day. So after 1 o'clock, this area of the garden where I've planted corn, it does get sun. So corn is one of those vegetables that you want to plant in full sun. It needs 8 hours of full sun. So I don't recommend growing corn in shade, and I do not recommend growing corn in partial shade as well. So this is my experiment. I'm going to experiment growing corn in partial shade, so it gets about 4 to 5 hours of sun, and let's see how it does. However, I have Swiss chard going right over there. So these Swiss chard are planted in partial shade. They get about 4 to 5 hours of full sun. However, Swiss chard planted way over there gets shade all throughout the day. It gets no sun at all. And I have chickens roaming around here too. They're getting rid of the bugs, so that's good. So this Swiss chard is growing in shade all throughout the day, and it's as big as the Swiss chard that's going in partial shade. It does get some amount of full sun. So Swiss chard does really well in shade.
Number 8, broccoli. Now broccoli is also a cool weather crop. However, you can grow broccoli in shade. I do not recommend growing broccoli in full summer, in the full heat of summer, because broccoli won't do well. You can harvest the top crown of broccoli and the side shoots will produce a lot more broccolis or broccolinis, which are also really good to eat. Number 9, peas. Now peas are also a cool weather crop, and it's really good to grow peas in early spring, right after the frost, or even just a week or two before the last frost date. So you can get your garden started growing peas really early in the spring. However, if you're later in the spring or early summer, you can still grow peas in shade under a tree or under a side of the house that does not get full sun. Number 10, radish. Now radish are super easy to grow. I love to grow the icicle radish, the American red radish as well. The American red radish is really spicy and I really like to munch on this. And the icicle radish is really good to add to the salads as well. And radish is super easy to grow. It doesn't take much. During fall and spring, you can just throw the lettuce seeds out in your garden and it will germinate and grow, no problem. In summer, you can sow radish seeds in shade and it will grow as well. It only takes about a month for radish to mature and harvest. However, if you're growing radish in shade, it might take a little bit longer, maybe about 45 days to harvest radish. So that was the first section of the video in which we covered vegetables and herbs that do really well in shade. Now let's move on to the second section of the video in which I'm going to cover vegetables and herbs that do well in shade. However, they would have produced a lot more harvest if planted in full sun. Number 11, green onions. You can direct sow green onions right in your garden and you'll start to grow green onions in no time. You can always thin out green onions and transplant them as well. However, I do not recommend growing the entire onion bulb in shade or even partial shade. The bulb of onion needs a lot of energy and full sun to produce a really nice large onion. Number 12, cherry tomatoes. Usually you don't want to plant tomatoes in shade. Tomatoes need full sun. However, cherry tomatoes tend to do really well in shade. You would have gotten a lot more harvest if you planted cherry tomatoes out in full sun. However, if you have an area in your garden beside your house, under a tree, or somewhere in your garden that does not receive any sun and you get lots of shade, you can always plant cherry tomatoes, and cherry tomatoes tend to do well in shade and you still get quite a bit of crop from cherry tomatoes as well. Number 13, eggplants. Now eggplants do require full sun. However, eggplants will produce some harvest if planted in shade. So you can still enjoy eggplants if you had an area in your garden that receives a lot of shade and no sun. Eggplants are really good to stir fry or even add to your sandwiches along with zucchini. Which leads to our next vegetable, number 14, squash. Now squash also requires full sun. However, squash will still grow in shade. Let me show you some of the yellow neckroot squash and some of the zucchini I've got growing in shade over here. So here's a squash I have that's growing in shade. Now it's growing well. It's not as big as the squash that's growing out in the front of our property that gets full sun. That squash is about 5 to 6 feet wide right now, and it's producing about 1 to 2 pounds of squash per plant. So we harvest about 2 to 3 squash per day from each plant, and now we are getting about 15 pounds of squash every single day. However, these plants still produce squash in shade. Check it out. The squash is not as big, it doesn't grow as vigorously. However, if you have an area in your garden that does not receive full sun, you can still grow squash and still enjoy squash in summer. Number 15, green beans. I also have some green beans growing here. This is the bush variety of green beans that I'm growing right in shade. Green beans are also really good to grow in shade. However, they won't give you as big of a harvest if they were planted in full sun. However, you can still enjoy really nice and tender green beans even in your shade garden. These are the 15 vegetables and herbs you can grow in shade. Now let's also cover some vegetables you cannot grow in shade at all, because it's really good to know what you can plant, what you cannot plant in full sun or in shade, because you don't want to make a mistake of putting in a lot of hard work and grow something in shade and it doesn't grow and doesn't produce. So these are the ones you should never grow in shade. Number 1, corn. Now corn requires full sun. If corn doesn't get sun, it's not going to give you harvest. Heirloom tomatoes is the second one that will not grow as long as it does not get full sun. So never plant heirloom tomatoes in shade either. Number 3, potatoes. Now potatoes like cool weather and lots of sun. if the temperature becomes above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, potatoes will stop producing tubulars. It will stop producing potatoes underground. So you must plant potatoes in full sun in spring or fall. Number 4, chilies. Now chilies require a lot of sun. You never want to grow chili plants in shade. However, you can grow bell peppers in shade. Bell peppers tend to do really well in shade and they do not get sun-scrotching spots as well. Number 6, cucumbers. Now cucumbers are, trellising variety. They whine and climb up on the trellis and they love full sun. So no matter if you're planting pickling cucumber or eating kind or Armenian cucumber, you always want to plant your cucumbers in full sun. And number 6, okra. Okra also requires a lot of sun. If planted in shade, you only get 1 or 2 okra plant. I tried that last year. I tried growing some of the okra under shade of some trees. It did produce, but not even enough to pay off for all the hard work that you put in. 1 to 2 okras per plant is absolutely nothing. So you always want to plant okra in full sun as well. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you can make good use of your garden that does not get full sun. And if you want to grow a garden in shade, now you can. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in another video.